Hi, welcome everyone to Samaritan's podcast regarding the National Benchmark Survey. We wanted to get together with the partners we worked with to tell the story about how the survey came into existence and allow each of us to kind of tell our part up into the involvement with the Beryl Institute. So today we have with us Maryellen Brady from Lucile Packard Children's Hospital, Stanford, Sara Flores, and Rutherford. There's our first mix-up today. Can't say your name apparently, Barbara. Um, from Kaiser Permanente, and myself, Keith Leonard, and Bryce Robinson from Samaritan Software. So thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to the first time we've recorded this together. I hope you're all doing well today.
Thank you.
Insert chatter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
happy to be here.
Yes.
A pleasure.
All right, so this all began years and years ago for us here at Samaritan. As a software company working in healthcare specifically, we are constantly asked what others are doing, what each of our clients have done. As we have conversations with potential clients, we're constantly asked, well, how do others do it? And that conversation was useful, except for Samaritan only represents a percentage of the actual market space. So only we talk to we'd love to talk to everyone, but frankly, we only talk to a certain number, and we only have so much. And I really wanted something in some way to know and help the industry with comparing one organization to another. And it kind of dawned on me years ago that a benchmark would do that, right? An actually established standard. And when we first started working and looking at this, and this is probably about a decade ago, maybe even more, probably actually 15 years ago, we came up with the fact that there was no benchmark survey for volunteerism, and specifically as well for healthcare volunteerism. And so there are numbers, right? So independent sector for years has been producing the volunteer value, a dollar of volunteer value, and there are other kind of studies and groups that have done pieces of the puzzle, but no one had actually produced a benchmark survey. And I think the first time I started talking to others outside of Samaritan about this was actually Maryellen Brady. We started talking about it years ago because as we went through an implementation with her, she asked these same questions that others had about, what are others doing, and what could we do to improve our process, and I'm interested. And so we talked about it through our implementation. And then, however, years later, internally in Samaritan, the marketing group here was thinking about projects that we could work on, and the benchmark survey came up again. And I, as part of that group, said, this has been something I've cared about for years that we haven't really, done. I would love to actually kind of lead that, and I know exactly who I want to talk to. And so I actually reached out to Maryellen. Maryellen, do you remember? I don't know if you remember that conversation, and what happened afterwards, but would you like to tell us a little bit of your story?
So we had a lot of conversations, Keith, about this, and some of them were talking about how can we get the word out about, what we do in volunteer services, volunteer professionals. Um, you know, how can we get leadership to recognize us and the work that we do? And just have been doing stuff on my own for many years. I am gathering my own information and working with my colleagues to just try to move the profession forward and maybe make things not so fluff anymore in the world of volunteer services. And then at that time, my lovely colleague Sara had contacted me because she was working on a very similar issue. And I think, Sara, that's where your fun story picks up. So, Sara, take it away.
Yeah, Mary Ellen, it was, being in volunteer services, you're searching for what size should our programs be? What should it look like at a medical center? I had leadership in Southern California, Kaiser Permanente, asking me, like, well, what are other organizations doing? How should our programs be made in volunteer services? And there just wasn't really anything. And then that's when Mary Ellen and I connected. I was like, have you done anything like this? Have you asked people? If I surveyed you, Mary Ellen, would you take my little survey? And I think I started with interviews of like 7 different organizations was my start of like, I just need to know other organizations in California. What are they doing in volunteer services? And that's when Mary Ellen's like, we need to connect with Keith because he's passionate about this too. and maybe we, can get some movement going on this because, every organization out of those other seven that I talked to, they all wanted the same thing. So there was the desire, right? And the appetite for some type of survey, some type of knowledge, and some type of way to elevate the profession of volunteer services.
Now, I
Yeah,
can't
we just
remember.
didn't know how to do it.
How long ago was this? Was this 2 years ago? 3 years ago? This was at this point. Are we talking?
Sara reached out to me I think it was November 2023.
Oh wow.
And it might have even been September. I don't know, it was something
Mhm.
around there. And then we had a lot of conversation about how, we are always getting contacted, not just us, but like each other. We're all contacting each other and moving each other forward and going, oh, I have this many FTE and I do this and I do that. But there was no one centralized place for all of us to look to or look for, this information. And it's, still happening today. It's not going to be happening too much longer, but it's still happening today. We have some great data now. So, but yeah, it's been a long time.
I remember we all met, the three of us, and kind of saying, and I think there were a lot of these questions about what would this look like, and I think the answer was we don't know, right? We know we want to ask some questions. I think we arrived at the idea that, well, before we go off and do something, we know, because I think if I remember right, Marianne, I think you brought up, or maybe it was you, Sara, that you said, hey, Cause the local organization in California has kind of asked questions before. And so he said, well, we think that the first step is for us to go and review these other surveys and see if they would represent what could be a national benchmark survey, right? Because the Cause one was more California specific. And so I think we all decided that let's do research. And so I don't remember. I know Samaritan. We went off and did some research because I do. We came across ultimately. We didn't find any national survey in the U.S. that we thought was comprehensive enough. It was either localized, but it wasn't. It was also like maybe a few questions. I do recall that one of you mentioned that I think it was Sara said there is an organization that benchmark, and it was another company and they kind of benchmark, but they were more interested in like the overall picture of the hospital itself and weren't focused only on volunteerism. I think if I remember right, I think also we learned that from one of the other Stanford, I think the Stanford medicine side, that they said, yeah, this survey we fill out, I think there were 3 questions on volunteerism. And we said, no, that's not enough. Does that all sound familiar before we actually kind of found the international survey?
Yeah, I also think we were trying to, before we even began, to figure out, because we all agreed that everyone has survey burnout. Like, if we were going to move this forward, what was going to be the easiest way? And we did a lot of research on, how many hospitals were there, what kind of data is out there, not just survey data, but hospital data, and how easy is that to find and see if maybe that could be feeding through a survey to make life easier for people so that they weren't spending so much time on simple things so we could really get to what we wanted to talk about. So I think there was just a lot of prep. It wasn't just, creating these questions, this research
Yeah.
and finding out what else is going on. But also like, if we're going to do this, let's be smart about it so that people don't have survey burnout. And we do get the numbers we needed. So I think that was another thing as well. So.
Yeah, and I think we looked at HCAPS, right? Didn't we use that
Yes.
as like one of the
Yes.
guiding points? Was like, okay, here we have HCAP surveys, right? That all hospital, every patient that gets discharged from a hospital, it's regulated. They have to get an HCAP survey that's going to ask them about their experience. And we said, okay, this is, you can go onto a website, you can look at scores from these surveys. Um, and that was kind of our end game, right? We're like, okay, that's where we want to get to one day, right? Was like this survey being so robust that you can go up and go on a website, right? And start looking at hospitals and looking at their volunteer programs, right? And things along those lines. So I think like we had a really great like North Star of like where we want to go. And it was just incredible to find people that also had such passion because it took so many years and hours to get to where we're at today.
We were dreaming pretty big though, Sarah.
We were dreaming
Big.
big, right?
We always love to dream big, guys.
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, right. We looked at the fact. I think that's where we started looking at hospitals, right? And we said, look, there's the numbers kind of vary a little bit, but there's about 4,000. There's surveys that go anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 hospitals, and we said, well, how many do we want? And I think our first answer was we want them all. We want all 4 to 6,000 responding. And then because we had those big ideas. Because I remember at some point as well around that same time, two things happened. We discovered an international survey in Australia that actually covered kind of from what we thought when we were first looking at it, seemed to cover Australia and then New Zealand. We have actually found it had been running for a handful of years, I think even more than 10 actually, and it had covered, seemed like it had first started in Australia, then New Zealand, then Canada, and it also had some other some U.S. hospitals, and it was pretty big. I think it was something like, was it like it had been small and then grown over time, and actually before that, excuse me, I forgot a step. We'd started putting questions down, right? What questions would you want? And realized how many questions there could be. Realized we should look for other surveys. Found this survey. Was it the Love Network? I get that right?
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
that. And the contact was has a great name, Shaz, right? That's her nickname, but she goes by Shaz. And so we said we should reach out because honestly, this survey is everything we are dreaming of.
Yes.
Right. And I think
Yep.
Maryellen or Sara, one of the two of you, we said we should have you reach out. They don't know who we are at Samaritan, but you're in the industry. So I think Maryellen, you reached out to Shaz and said, hey, would you be willing to talk to us?
I did. I found her, I think, on LinkedIn, and she was so gracious to meet with us. We had a nice long, we were on the phone or the call with her for quite some time, and she really talked to us about her process and the pros and cons and some of her challenges, and and was really excited for us and gave us some great feedback about how to move forward and what to avoid. And then was hoping that she would also see the results of this survey at one point. So I know even later on we reached out to her, which we'll get to later on. But and she gave us additional feedback. But she was really knowledgeable about how to get this done. And I kept thinking, how is this so hard? Like, how could this be so hard? We just have a couple questions, and
Yeah.
now I know. Now I know, and I have even more respect for Shaz for her doing this for so many years. So
I remember her saying, feel free to use the survey, right? She's like, oh
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
if you want to copy them, then she agreed. She said you may not have questions that don't correlate from Australia to the United States. You might have different questions. She also said, I think if I remember right, she's like, I'm not sure that we're going to keep running it. So then we started getting these aspirations of international, and we're like, yeah, we hadn't been thinking that, so even it got even bigger. And I think it's about that time too that we were like, well, we're only talking to hospitals. What about the hospice world? I think that was all like on top of each other, right? I mean, at this point,
Yep.
we had decided to meet. Were we meeting like every couple of weeks, I think, and we would kind of talk about how this would formulate. We were like, we're going to need partners. How do we make this have credibility across all the market space? And so we all were, we started reaching out to other people, other hospitals, right? And I think that's where Barbara comes into the conversation, right?
Yes. Yes, you're right. Well, and we were just like, I think we were talking about, we came up with conferences and that there's this whole community of volunteer professionals in the hospice space. And, Mary Ellen and I are not professionals in that space, right? And
yeah.
so that's when I knew Barbara from working with her at Kaiser. And I was like, Barbara, do you have interest in this? Just from the interactions we had, I had already, known that she would have had a passion for it, right? And that she would have saw the value in it. And then that's when we brought her into the team. Um, and yeah, and you say like we'd meet once every few weeks. It was like twice a week, Keith, for
I know.
multiple
Yeah,
hours.
I
Keith,
remember that. I heard that came later. Was it already that
it
early
it
on?
was
It was a lot.
it was pretty deep from the get-go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
feel like
Okay.
that by the time that Sarah reached out to me and I joined, you guys were already doing the double dutch with like multiple things happening at the same time, and I had to kind of jump in and find the flow with it. But it's really interesting to actually hear you talk about even a decade ago or just really the thoughts leading up to it because. I have been having these same conversations over the last 13 years of working in this space with my professional peers at other hospices in Southern California and within San Diego. And the same questions that you all talked about, we were really trying to find information from each other and help to support each other. And we knew that, more information, more data, more connection was really going to help elevate our programs, which is essentially what we're talking about, really examining what efforts, what resources, what organizational structures really create ideal volunteer programming for both hospital and hospice, just really in the healthcare space. So when I think actually, Keith, I spoke with you maybe the first time, I want to say it was 2019 or 2020, because we were looking at a lot of different volunteer management systems for Southern California hospice, specifically for Kaiser. And our conversations really kind of started then and then developed. But within, I think, maybe 2 years of that, Sara and I were working on task force to help build what we have now, which is a Samaritan system, not just for hospital, not just for hospice, but for all of Kaiser Permanente's volunteer programs, really kind of putting them under one roof, which was a Herculean task, just on its own. It took a very long time to do that. But when she asked me if I would be interested, of course, I'm like, of course I'm interested. I'm just waiting for someone to kind of ask these questions. And, I really give a lot of kudos to all of you because hospice is so underrepresented, really, and across the spectrum. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with a natural bias of people really shying from the subject and not being sure of how to approach it. And so to be asked to participate and to be a really integrated member of it was a dream come true, I guess you could say. I think I said that to you at Sarah at some point of, yeah, you asked me to be a part of this, so I'm in it 100%. I really want to see what we can come up with. And it was a lot of hours. And I came in, it's been almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years actually next month, so in a couple weeks. But we did dedicate a lot of time, a lot of hours, and very careful consideration to every component of what we're doing to make sure that it was meaningful and inclusive and representative of what's out there.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think you represent what I saw. I remember actually I was at a keynote at a conference and they mentioned that you shouldn't think of it as healthcare, not as hospital and hospice, but healthcare systems. And that was the moment where I kind of started realizing, because we have been at Samaritan primarily hospital based, not out of choice, just that's who kind of came to us. And then as hospices were starting to get integrated into these hospice systems, into healthcare systems, I really saw like, the future of healthcare and healthcare volunteerism is this unified, group. And so certainly Kaiser has that approach. And some everyone's on a different capacity maturity model and everyone's, in different journeys, but that certainly is part of what's been happening. I remember like in those days too, it was, there is a whole group of people, and the group, and I even wonder now looking at the survey, like, will it change in that regard as well? Because you've got other groups like the PFCCs. We've been talking to student groups where they bring in students for training and research and so forth. Even auxiliaries now and how they work. So I can imagine we're not done, right? This is never done, unfortunately. Fortunately and unfortunately, it is a work that continues. So we wanted to talk a couple minutes about the process. So kind of the weeds for those kind of people who like to geek out and be like, what did you guys do? So we were meeting, I had forgotten, we were meeting 2 days a week. We had a very strong deadline, right? We thought, let's get this thing out. How will we get it out? I know we at Samaritan had looked at we'd used Google Forms and Google Surveys. And we said, well, and we were most familiar with those. And so we just started building it into a Google survey to see what it would look like, and kind of decided that may not be the long-term way. And so I think we arrived. So that was some of it, right? And we were really hyper focused at that time in to the questions, right? And what were the right questions? And then as we brought Barbara in saying, okay, Barbara, does this question make sense for hospital and hospice, or no, should we change it? So that led to like technical questions of, can we show one question versus the other, and so forth. What do you all remember is like some of the parts that kind of stand out to you about being in the weeds in the process of actually putting the survey together?
Laboring, we were so we wanted to make sure we asked the questions the right way. So we got in the like we would labor over one question sometimes and how that question was worded
The
for
definition of a volunteer,
tier.
remember? Yeah.
Yeah. It was like laboring over the littlest thing because we knew one, we don't, our audience doesn't have a huge attention span, right? So it was also like, we know our managers are so busy. So if we don't really put in the time up front and labor over word usage of these questions, everything how it's worded, we're going to lose that
Lose
one
people.
opportunity to capture them. And
Yeah.
so I think like thinking of the weeds, definitions, Mary Ellen hit it on the head. We labor over what is the definition of a volunteer, just the simple, and we would reword it and word it again, the question. And then, we'd meet 2 days later and go, oh my gosh, I have a better way of wording that. Um, and so I think putting in the time, it took so long to get here because we really put in the time up front to be thoughtful and methodical about every word usage and question. And then reading a question and go, well, how would that make me feel if I answered it? Would I want to answer that question? Um, and
It was
so
order too, right?
it,
We'd be like,
or
and
yes,
that's where I think we started seeing some big changes, I think, from Shaz's survey, right? Because we're like, we really should move this to a different section or create a whole new section. And
Yeah. I also think that was the time where Barbara jumped in with that double dutch, like nobody's business, nice and smooth. And I started learning a lot more about hospice and started thinking more thoughtfully about how the questions were going to be posed so that it was encompassing all of us, not just my little world of pediatrics or just this one healthcare system. So I think having that perspective and having all three of us, because we are all in different roles, we're in different types of hospitals. That also was eye-opening in a way for me to learn and also to make sure that those questions were being put out there in a very thoughtful way. But I mean, I think we joked all the time about forget survey burnout. We have like question survey burnout just from trying to get this one word right, or this one question correct. And I think what moved us forward, Keith, was you and Bryce really start talking about putting things into categories, which really helped us organize our thoughts as well. So,
Yeah, your
yeah,
organization and keeping us to task was critical. It was pivotal, really, to everything that we were doing. But just like everyone has said so far, I mean, without a national benchmark survey, we didn't really have a common language. We didn't have the ability to really, base these questions on things that had been done before. We were creating it together and trying to build that inclusivity and trying to make sure that we examined every portion of what a definition could be so that we didn't throw off a respondent, making sure that they understood, what we were asking. And some of that was very clear in terms of, the way that hospital volunteers are managed and assigned and onboarded and all those things, as opposed to the language of how hospice volunteers really look. And if you look at every segment of volunteering, teen, et cetera, each one of them has their own language and their own definitions really that they work through. So combining all of that together, in addition to trying to not ask 500 questions that we all wanted to know the answer for, like that really required a lot of attention and a lot of thought and care. And I really do think that we not only did our due diligence, but we really paid homage to the fact that we wanted to be as inclusive as possible and bring everybody on board.
yeah,
yeah. I think.
oh,
Oh, and
I, I just wanted to add to that, Barbara, that I think we didn't plan that all three of us are from California. That just happened. And so we had a very California perspective, and um, we were trying to speak the language of everyone for across the country. And I do think that Samaritan helped us with that because you have partners, you partner with so many other hospitals across, so you were able to bring some of that in before we started talking to focus groups. That's a whole nother set of this process, but
What?
I think that also helped us just move everything forward because we were kind of in our own bubble here in California as well. So yeah.
That's actually similar to what I was going to say. I remember at that point there were times when that kind of same pattern happened again, where you'd say, "Well, I know how we do it at our organizations, but Samaritan, what have you seen with others?" Right? And I remember we would start kind of consulting. I consulted a little bit internally with some of our staff members, but we'd say, "Okay, we're talking about the weeds of activity status and what values." And I remember Sara at one point, I was like, I want to ask all the questions and I want to know all the implementation steps. And Sara's like, Keith, that is so many questions. Like, you got to back off. You got too much energy right now for that. And finding that compromise. But I do think that, and Bryce, you might say, like, I can remember, like, we would pass to you all these changes. Like, I can't remember how many times you rebuilt that survey, but you probably built it like at least 3 to 5 times.
Less
Yeah.
Bryce.
The other thing that I think, even though it was only 2 years ago, or that we started all of this, like start creating all of this content, we very rarely used any sort of AI. Did you guys
Yeah.
notice that? I mean, we did a lot
Yeah.
of this on our own, and then I think that's changed so much in just 2 years. We're like, let's just put this in and see what Chat GPT says, or whoever, whatever the
Isn't that crazy,
AI.
Mary?
Yeah.
We must be connected in our minds. That is exactly what, as I listened to you, that's exactly what I thought. I was like, I remember how much we just talked about every word. We might look up something online for like, an alternative word, but yeah, we weren't using AI like today, where I think we would, if we did this again, we would probably like feed version after version to AI, right?
Mhm.
It'll be
It would have
interesting
been
to see how that affects in the future, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we did not use AI, not like we do here at Samaritan now. So that was interesting. I do remember, to your point too, that we had the question about should we bring more people in, because we had
Yeah.
reached out to a handful, and we also said like Samaritan clients versus non-Samaritan clients, right? So we'd reached out to groups of people who we know at Samaritan, and we know who have kind of like minds, who knew this would be something that mattered to them, and they did. But then we were like, this is a lot of Samaritan clients, so we reach out to others. So you guys reached out to others as well. We reached out to more hospices. But if I remember right, in the end, we decided that and there's a reason why the military puts groups into like small units, right? Is that a small unit can get a lot done. And so we actually came to the conclusion, even though we had a bunch of people who said we would love to participate, we realized that we came to a conclusion, I think, talking with them, that perhaps we should have a first draft and then go out and ask them for opinions. And if I remember right, we did a draft, and then we kind of gave it out to a handful of people, and then we out and did a focus group, right?
Yeah.
Is that the right?
Yes.
Did I have the right
Yeah.
thing? Yeah.
Yeah, we sent out a draft version to a group, a focus group per se, to take and give us edits to. Um, and they'd come back with questions, comments. But that was our really first, like, we were really cutting our teeth, putting ourselves out there. Like, what are these other professionals going to say? And again,
Yep.
like Keith, thanks to Samaritan, right? A lot of connections were made with individuals that we, Mariella and I and Barbara didn't know, right? To be part of those first reviewers. And then that grew into, okay, now we need to host a focus group where we bring, 10 people together and really talk about each questions and talk about their comments and talk about their feedback. And I think that was huge. And I think going back to keeping it small was so that we could be agile, right? So that we could make changes quickly, schedule meetings quickly and things like that. But we really brought in the voice of the customer, right, through these focus groups, through these drafts that we would send out, having them take it and hearing their groans about the length. And we go, okay, what questions are we going to cut out, right? Or
Yep.
did you finish it? No, you didn't finish it. Okay, tell us why you didn't finish it. So all of those conversations, right, helped us piece together the building blocks of what we got to today. And they're all really integral to that success, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and that's the time too, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, that we started saying, all right, how does this look coming from Samaritan versus should it come from another party? And we started kind of bringing up the concept. I think we actually had conversations before that, but this is where I think it really started hitting, the fact that perhaps this shouldn't come from Samaritan. It should come from other groups. And I remember we looked at other partners. I think we looked at, other conferences, right? Because we wanted to be inclusive. I think we looked at hospice conferences. We looked at hospital groups. I know some of the names are out there. I think we looked at like a handful of them, and ultimately Samaritan had a relationship. Stanford and Kaiser have relationships with the Beryl Institute, and we knew that we actually had looked up and found their patient experience survey and thought they're doing this in patient experience. After HVRP kind of disappeared, the Beryl Institute got involved with volunteerism and healthcare volunteerism, and so there was a presence already. And so we thought, well, maybe the Beryl Institute would be one of those potential partners.
Yeah, and I think the Beryl Institute is an international organization too. And that was big for us, right? Tying it back to the times of Shaz and talking to her, we wanted our big future plans at the beginning, right? Was this to be a big survey, international survey? How are other countries, doing this? So I think that was one of the big draws to the Beryl Institute, right? And then also how they conduct their other surveys and their research, and the community they have built for their organization.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if I remember right, so we have, Samaritan works with them. So Samaritan reached out to the Beryl Institute. They were interested. We started having conversations about how and what that would look like, which eventually actually led to the Beryl Institute taking over kind of like the operational part that Samaritan had been doing, still working with you all and having, the three of you carry this to completion, which we don't know how Samaritan as much about, but that's kind of how that worked out and how the Beryl came in and ultimately carried this to the finish line, running the survey and ultimately producing it, and then Samaritan kind of moving to a role of more just kind of being the sponsor, and it was kind of a happy, sad moment. We were glad to have another partner come in, but I remember just talking about some of the joys. Like this project was a lot, but at no point did I ever these calls were just fun and working with you all. We laughed so much. They always say like high performing teams, and I study high performing teams constantly. I've been on some high performing teams, and it's just the joy of my career to work with smart, intelligent, people who have the same hope, have the same dedication, because it gives you energy. And this wasn't easy, right? There were some good and bad things. We're not going to share those on this podcast, but yeah, we had but I just remember it was a joy. Like Bryce and I we'd be like, okay, when do we get to meet with them again, right? And sometimes we'd spend and you just kind of talk shop before we get into the survey. But those are some of my things I remember enjoying about the survey. What kind of things did you guys? What memories do you have of all those working sessions?
It's I love what you said about it. And it's interesting because I know all of us participated in those calls, whether we were on vacation or wherever we were at, we wanted to be a part of it. And it really was, we work in volunteer services. We manage and facilitate people giving their time for free to doing good, in the world and in their communities. And it's one of the best volunteer projects that I've worked on, in my life. And I've volunteered in a lot of different areas. But like you said, Keith, it was the common goal of knowing that this information is so incredibly important and that we really were going to do everything that we were in control of to be able to see it come to fruition and to have it happen. Because if it wasn't going to be us, if we allowed it to be buried or we didn't work on it, then we're going to be having the same conversation of what's going on out in our field, in 5 or 10 years. So there was a lot of motivation, and I certainly appreciated just really, I think, our group has kind of a servant leadership attitude about it of, yes, these things can get sticky. And we did turn over maybe the same question, multiple times and spend a lot of time on it. But it really speaks to the care and the importance that I think we all embraced about this work. And I think it's a happy bonus that we all actually really like each other and we enjoy each other's sense of humor. But it really was. I looked forward to it every time. No matter if we were dragging the same question through a second hour of questioning or revision, it was so important. And we all learned so much through the process too. As much as we're subject matter experts in our, individual fields, we learned so much from each other and so much from you, Keith, and from Bryce as well. So it really was, it was a labor, but it was a labor of love, and definitely something that I think all of us really want to give this gift, certainly to ourselves. It's something that we're really going to benefit from, our programs are going to benefit from, but certainly give it to the field because it's a remarkable thing that we get to help facilitate, and that Samaritan helps get to, organize and assist volunteer programs and being the best they can be. So I really think a lot of it is that it's kind of altruistic, but really that feel good component that I think all of us got out of it. That was a big part of it for me.
Love it.
Yeah,
Maryellen, Sarah?
it was Friday night. We'd have meetings Friday afternoon sometime at like 4 p.m. Nobody wants to be on a meeting at 4 p.m., but there we were laughing hysterically sometimes about the smallest things. And, a lot happens in your life over 2 years of meeting with the same people, right?
Yeah.
We got puppies. Some of us got puppies. Like our kids were going through stuff. Like, and we were sharing as we were working on this, we were also sharing our like life story. It was really kind of great and magical in that sense. And there were so many moments where just laugh. And then we'd be like, okay, we can't stop laughing. Like we have to be done for the day. We're not getting anything more done. Um, and it was really that camaraderie, I think, that really pushed us that we're like, okay, because if it wasn't fun, we were not going to do it, right? And if we weren't also personally connected with each other, we weren't going to see this through. And so it was those like moments of joy that really brought us right to that finish line, and made us bond, I think. And yeah, it's just, yeah, tacos and margaritas forever.
Yeah.
Benchmark
I
beauties.
yeah. I think the just like everyone else said, the padding on the meeting so that we could have some therapy time to be like, hey guys, how's it going? Or laughing through one of these, or just go, okay, we got to get back to work. I also enjoyed when out of everyone on the call, Bryce would be the one to say, all right, guys, let's get through these last couple questions here. And we're like, no, no more questions, please, Bryce. Was always a fun time. And I was just mentioning earlier to you guys before we started this that Bryce and Keith weren't a part of the commercial, quote unquote, that we created to try to get the word out. But we did have quite a laugh on the day. I can't even tell you how many takes did we do for that? For like a 5 minute, please take our survey, was just I think that was it was a really good day. Like I think we were all a little bit stressed out about, like, nervous about it, and we just were laughing through it. And then not to get to the very end, but that celebration when the survey launched over tacos and margaritas was a really nice way to celebrate and launch the survey, looking back at the 2 years of working on it. So I think those are some of mine. But
I'm so impressed, and so I mean, you really, the three of you, you took it, ran with, and worked with Beryl and some great people at Beryl to make it happen. To then literally, I mean, so much work even after. I mean, we're talking about a lot of work already, but then to act, you refined it again, if I remember. You narrowed down those questions. You guys were kind to like update us about what was happening. Got the actual survey out into Qualtrics and out into the world, and then came back, assessed it, and produced a report, which we're going to see here just next week. So I think I am interested in to see what happens with the report and the impacts and the stories about how people are going to use it, and work with their with everyone in management to understand, because I do think, unfortunately, the impact that volunteer services, I think people see the impact volunteer services has. I don't think they understand the work that goes into making that happen.
Hmm.
right.
I don't think I've ever worked on an implementation where somebody in another department, be it, IT or HR or compliance or any of these other departments aren't actually absolutely impressed and blown away with how much volunteer services does and how much, whether it be in hospital or hospices, how much it takes to make, the impact of volunteers. And, I think we're all in this because we believe, that volunteers can have this massive impact in the world and are proud about that. So I'm super excited to see how the next phase of it, and looking forward to, as I think Shaw's has a great example of how you carry it out, and we could see in her survey it change over time. I can imagine the same thing's going to happen with this survey, and it's fascinating. But any other kind of thoughts you have as we wrap this up on the impact and what you're looking forward to, the thing you're proud about this whole this endeavor, this project?
I don't think I don't think we should move forward without at least acknowledging the hard work that Brittany did for us. Brittany Lax at Beryl. She helped us organize it even more. And she helped us, and Jason Wolf believed in all of this, which would not have moved forward without him believing in the work that we're doing too. And I think that was really important. But Brittany kept us on track, and also made sure that what we promised in our pitch to everyone really happened, and we were able to deliver. And what we are delivering is the full report, the overview, the executive one pager for everyone. And I think Brittany understood how important it was for us to make sure we this is our name that we're putting on this. And so we need to make sure that we can back this up. And I think she really helped us and had a great sense of humor with all of us as well, and could see the frustration and really helped us. And she worked with, the vendor to help this happen, and did some of the work that, we didn't have to do at that end. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge how amazing Brittany was for all of this as well. So and the impact, I'm just hoping we're gonna see what that looks like really soon. I'm hoping that it's what everyone needed and wanted, and we'll see what this looks like afterward, right? Are we doing this again? Are we doing this again? Are we doing round two? Yeah,
We're
so
doing round two.
yeah, Sarah,
It's
what do you think?
happening.
Yeah.
We're doing round two. We have to keep it, I think for me, it was like I can't Beryl support, right? Jason and Brittany were just fabulous with all of this. And I think, when Jason's like, our goal is 100 responses. And I like, part of me was like heartbroken. He's like, that's a success if we get 100 responses. And I was like, no, but I wanted more. Like first year, we wanted thousands, as Keith mentioned earlier. Like we're going to get all these responses. And then what did we end up with? I think over three,
200.
300 responses. And we were like,
Yeah, close
oh
to
my, and
three.
that was like a moment where I was like, we did the right thing. Like
Yeah.
there was, and so like I just remember that call of hearing our response rate when the survey closed and just being like, we did, this was all these years, right? We gained all these friendships and we got the result that we wanted. And so that was just an aha moment of like, you did the right work, right? You did a good job. Like, you know, keep going. And so I'm excited to see this grow. The partnerships that we've all made grow over time. And yeah, there's a bright future for this survey. And I'm looking forward to all the data that we get in the future.
Love it. Barbara, you get the final word.
Lucky me. Yeah, all of the above. I mean, again, the partnerships that we've had from the very beginning. Again, I stepped in kind of in the middle of everything, but Keith and Bryce and the support and the organization, and then going to Beryl with Jason and Brittany, it really was more than I would have ever expected in terms of enthusiasm and really cheering us on and keeping us on track, and not bringing us down when we had these really grand, lofty goals, but really wanting to make sure that those things are happening. And the impact is something that I'm just super excited about. I am so thrilled that the entirety of this experience for the last 2 years I think we have always talked about it being more than a 1 year survey. We know from the very beginning, starting off with a survey that might have taken 3 hours to complete, we know that there's a lot of questions to be asked. And it's only the starting point really to starting, asking those questions and developing data that's going to be able to support everyone. So the
Yeah.
fact that it's really being considered as a multi-year effort speaks to the support that we have, to the infrastructure that we've really built in terms of partnerships and all of the work, the vast intelligence of all of these people combined to make it happen. It's an extraordinary thing. It is quite magical, actually. I think Maryellen is the one who said that initially.
Well, wonderful. I want to thank all three of you, Barbara and Sara, Maryellen, Bryce. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate reflecting a little bit on the survey. I agree. I think the impact of the survey, I have high hopes, and I'm looking forward to future surveys as we can kind of look at the longevity and the growth of this of volunteerism in healthcare. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're gonna call it a wrap, and we'll see you again on the next podcast, maybe about the benchmark survey again. So we'll see. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
you.